An interesting claim that I hear from the faithful time and again is that the Bible is inerrant, or error-free, incapable of being wrong. The other claim is that the Bible is infallible, or reliable and trustworthy. Many Christians like to use these two words as though they are interchangeable, but they do have separate meanings. Someone who believes the Bible is inerrant will also believe the Bible is infallible. The reverse of this, however, is not necessarily true. I must admit I get a certain kind of thrill when I'm faced with this claim, because it's one that's provably wrong time and again. The trouble is many Christians will use apologetics to get around any of these issues, and none of what they use is actually scriptural or biblical. Of course, not every Christian believes in the inerrancy of Scripture, and will take a more relaxed approach to it, stating that some is allegory, other parts are parables for teaching and instruction, and yet other parts are down to scribal errors or a misunderstanding of earlier Scripture by the writers. The problems with this side of the argument should be apparent to anyone. If you fail to take a literalist approach to Scripture, then you're stating that some of it is true and other parts are not quite true, but they're metaphorical or they're allegorical. And you then have to explain why this part or that part fit the allegory and how you sorted that from the rest of the alleged truth. One could very well presume that there's some sort of test used to verify if something is allegorical or a truth, but that's simply not the case. It merely comes down to personal interpretation of Scripture, and this is prevalent amongst those that try to justify Scripture with what we know of the world around us, as procured by scientific discoveries. None of this, however, lets the biblical literalist off the hook. When you affirm inerrancy, you dismiss the requirement of faith. You reject the need for faith. You ascribe perfection to the creation rather than that to the Creator. In your claim for inerrancy, you also fail to realize that in Genesis 2, the Scripture speaks of the creation of man. The moment God breathed life into man, it was not perfect, it was not perfection. It never could be. Man is not God. Likewise with Scripture, it's claimed to be God-breathed, but since it too is not God, it cannot be perfect. Even Paul, the most prolific writer in the New Testament, states in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know even as I also am known." St. Augustine, along with many other early church fathers, denounced inerrancy with regard to the Genesis fable, formally announcing that it must be taken in an allegorical fashion. God is not a magician, as Pope Francis stated back in 2014. The largest and most easily dismissible part of the biblical inerrancy is that science has utterly and completely falsified it where it makes statements about the natural world. We know the world is far older than 6,000 to 10,000 years old. We know that the Adamic fable is untrue, as stated. We know that evolution happened and is happening still. We know that the Exodus story is just that, a story, and a veritable host of other facts that are either denied in Scripture or never even made mention. A little odd, considering that God would have known all of these things we now know, like germ theory, but doesn't consider it worthwhile to make mention of any of it to the authors. Revelation 22, verses 18 and 19 give us the most potent description against inerrancy. "I warn everyone who hears the word of the prophecy of this scroll. If anyone adds to them, God will add to that person the plagues described in this scroll. If anyone takes away from the words of this scroll of prophecy, God will take away from that person any share in the tree of life and the holy city, which is described in this scroll." Now, if it were possible for it to be altered in any way, then it cannot be inerrant. Since Revelation states that it could be possibly changed, then it simply cannot be inerrant, and we must dismiss the claim arbitrarily. The Bible is not without fault. There's even a website devoted to the errors listed in Scripture called BibViz. I've linked to it in the description for those who wish to check it out. The Bible is not inerrant, it is not infallible, and to assume it is dismisses the actual facts that we can glean from Scripture. I'll finish off here with a quote from the author of Michael Shermer. "They're making the mistake of linking their belief in faith, in their religion, to actual factual tenets. These are not factual stories to be taken as historical events. They're really stories about how we should live our lives. They're moral homilies. What I can personally get out of the Bible for me today, that's what those stories are about. And to take them literally is, you're missing the point of the Bible." Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Cheers.